But I really did want to talk about the ethics of violence and the definition of violence and speech and all that stuff as it pertains to Chris Rock and Will Smith. So first of all, just to talk about the Will Smith part itself. So my understanding of the situation, Chris Rock has been making jokes about this for a while. Jada Pinkett Smith has an autoimmune disease of some kind that causes alopecia, or is alopecia itself an autoimmune disease? Regardless, she's been losing her hair, and it's a very big problem for black women in particular, for women in general to lose their hair, but black women in particular to lose their hair for cultural reasons. It's a very integral part of their culture, how they express themselves, who they are, all that kind of stuff. So black women losing your hair is a very big issue. And Chris Rock making fun of her for having an autoimmune disease, you know, it's ableist, and it hits on this very specific thing that is a particular trouble for black women. He made a joke about it in front of God and everybody at the Oscars, and Will Smith got up and walked over and smacked the shit out of him. Do we need to go over the footage? Well, let's see if I can pull it up real quick. So yes, he is initially laughing. Some people have pointed out, like, the room was already laughing, like he could have just, like, not processed what was said initially. I'm not sure exactly how you would explain or describe that reaction. Because he is laughing initially here.
Dana, I love you. G.I. Jane.
Oh, they're smiling initially already. So he's already cracked a joke of some kind. But he's smiling there.
That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Richard.
Because the camera was panned on Chris Rock, we didn't get to see the change. Like, we didn't see Will Smith's emotional evolution from hearing the joke initially to him walking up there.
Wow.
Wow, the eyebrows. I'm sorry, can we just look at this man's eyebrows? Look at his eyebrows as he walks by. He's like, yes, I did. Like, yes, I did, and you deserved it. Like, that's what the eyebrows are saying right there. I'm sorry if anybody else didn't notice that. That's kind of how I feel about what those eyebrows are saying.
Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me.
That's, I feel like, a fairly good characterization of what happened. He smacked the shit out of you.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth.
Wow, dude.
Yes.
It was a G.I. Jane joke.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth.
I'm going to, okay?
Like, listen, okay, some people, like, we're gonna come back to that very specific quote later. Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth. I'm going to. Okay, just keep that little nugget. Keep that little nugget in your brain. Just keep it in there.
Okay. That was a greatest night in the history of television. Okay. So we are here to give a documentary out, to give an Oscar out for...
To give an Oscar out for a documentary, presumably. So yeah. If you hadn't seen it before, now you've seen it. The little... I feel like he took it as well as he could have, honestly. Meeks saying Chris Rock took that so well. I mean, like, he got slapped. He didn't get slapped so hard that he lost his balance, or, like, he didn't, like, it seemed like he didn't, like, you know, wobble or anything. He didn't completely freak out or lose his composure. I mean, like, what else do you do? Like, you're two rich people, and one, like, you said some shit that you know was across the line, and then you got slapped for it. Like, what do you do? He was looking off stage, like, for direction. He was like, is someone gonna, like, tell me what to do next? Like, am I just meant to carry on? So he was under the spotlight of performance as well. So let's discuss. This is, like, opening the door for conversations beyond just this one situation, right? Which, you know, I know some people are like, can we just leave it at this? Like, it's funny. A rich person slapped the shit out of another rich person. At the end of the night, everybody in that room is going to sleep in a mansion. You know, what does it really matter? Like, why are we having discourse. Why are people talking about how this reminded them of their abusive parent? You know, like, what the fuck are we doing? Yeah, Old Woman Josiah says, I under no circumstances would want anyone to do that for me, but at the same time, I am kind of proud of him for being willing to. That's a conversation that people have been having about, like, how does Jada Pinkett Smith feel? Like, how does she feel about it? Is she appreciative, or does she, like, look down on it? And then some people saying, like, it just feels good that someone was willing to really go out there and stand up for a black disabled woman. Like, that is a group that is just kind of ignored, you know? Baphomet says, I have to ask myself, should I care about this every time I see shit relating to Will Smith hitting Chris Rock? Because, like, I really don't, but everyone's talking about it, so, like, to a lot of people it matters. I guess I just don't understand why. For me, is an open opportunity to talk about this words are not violence presumed framework. Violence is escalation presumed framework. The various situations in which violence is justified framework, right? One of the tweets that I put out, I said, I think we should normalize low-stakes violence. Cannot tell you how much of a relief it would be to know I can smack the shit out of somebody for, like, being transphobic. Bring back steep social consequences for coming at people sideways. So I'm making this tweet in context of Chris Rock getting the shit smacked out of him, okay? So what I'm trying to basically say here is that in situations where someone is being a fucking asshole, whether it's transphobia, whether it's racism, almost every time I've seen a video on the internet of a white person calling a black person the N-word, somewhere in that video, that white person has gotten the shit wrecked out of it. Like, they're just fucking at some point in the video, right? Generally, I don't see people morally condemning the black person for that act. Like, generally speaking. In my opinion, in that particular example, the person who used the N-word escalated the situation. There was some other conversation happening, presumably. They have escalated. When the black person punches that person in the face, to me, that is an equal retaliation. That is not an escalation. Even though we've escalated to physical violence, I personally am not of this weird opinion that words cannot be violent, first of all, and that physical violence is always an inappropriate escalation. Someone, like someone who's been a member of the community for a couple years, was replying to me about that point. And she's basically like, you never know what the other person will do. You know, like, if you smack them, you don't know if they will kill you, right? And for me, again, that's two escalations on their part. So again, taking the example of the white person calling the black person the N-word. White person calls them the N-word. That's escalation number one. Black person punches that person in the face. Equal ground, same level of violent intent. The white person then pulls out their gun to continue to enact violence on the black person. That's two escalations in this interaction, and they were both by the white person. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be discerning if we were to normalize this kind of casual violence. Like, you know, my partner has even impressed upon me the importance of not flipping people off while you're driving, because you never know if somebody just is gonna, like, pull out a gun on you, you know? Like, I get it. I guess, Meeks, my issue with low-stake violence like that is that it can very easily become high-stake violence. You smack someone, they trip and fall, and then they break their neck, then it's a problem. Part of normalizing violence in a culture is normalizing how to do it correctly. You can absolutely slap the shit out of someone without even making them lose their balance. As in the example of Chris Rock and Will Smith. You can absolutely slap the shit out of someone and put them on the ground. There's a spectrum. There's also, you could break your own hand slapping the shit out of somebody, you know? Like, you have to be taught how to do it correctly. And I think that there's an argument to be made that if you are at a level in society where you know that popping off at the mouth could result in some level of violence instead of zero violence, because physical violence is always bad. You realize that this has given people license to just say whatever the fuck they want with no social consequences, right? If a white person calls a black person the N-word, there is no verbal retaliation that can remedy that situation. There is nothing that you can call that white person that is going to be equal to the violence of that person being called the N-word. Like, it's just not possible, in my opinion. Like, there are no steep enough social consequences for white people using the N-word. That's why they keep doing it. Normalize slapping the shit out of somebody. What would justify low-stakes violence would vary between people, and it would justify bigots taking low-stakes violence against perceived wrongs, like a black man whistling at a white woman, or a trans woman simply going into the bathroom. And the majority would determine what violence is acceptable, and minorities would get the short end of that stick. I mean, part of what I'm advocating for is the minorities getting some kind of consensus about what kind of treatment toward their community is acceptable, right? Because what we already have is that the majority determines what violence is acceptable, right? Like, you realize that black people still get just murdered in the daylight in this country. And thankfully, Ahmaud Arbery's killers were sentenced, but he was still killed in the street like a fucking dog by normal people, not cops. Not even talking about cops. So the majority already determines what violence is acceptable, and minorities already get the short end of the stick. I am advocating for turning that situation around. What I'm saying is that what we have already is a system in which the violence of speech is just considered nonviolent. It's kind of like how, as an employee, if I were working at a food service restaurant kind of place and I ate food that I didn't pay for, they could have me arrested for stealing. Or if I took like some spare change out of the register, they could have me arrested for stealing. But if they don't pay me my wage, that's a civil suit. Crime has been constructed. The definition of a crime has been constructed, and therefore what behavior we can use to address those wrongs has been defined. And we have had the fucking neoliberal hegemony, for the most part, defining what violence is. Actually, not even just the neoliberal hegemony, but the people in power who are pro-police brutality are the ones creating the definition of violence. As another example, as a separate example from the previous one, another question that I had as an example, if we know that misgendering directly contributes to suicidality, which we do, that's a fact. We're taking that as a fact. Being misgendered, direct correlation to suicidality. Why is it not considered a direct form of self-defense, protecting your life, to smack the shit out of somebody for misgendering you maliciously? Obviously. I'm curious what we are supposed to do to address this harm. Diversity of tactics, true. Can we at the very minimum stop hemming and hawing over whether it's a good idea to punch a Nazi? Like, can we at least stop hemming and hawing about whether violence is a useful tactic? Because it is a useful tactic. It really frustrates me when people are like, violence is always wrong. Violence is never the answer. I'm like, sure thing, Ang. Ela Devine says, y'all need to read How Nonviolence Protects the State. Honestly, y'all, if I know that not everybody here watches Philosophy Tube. Part of the reason that I have flipped on this, like, frankly, like, I've been on my way this way for a while, but Abigail posted a video a few months back called, like, Violence and Protest. And in that video, she's primarily talking about the protest associated with environmental protection, eco-terrorism, as some people would call it. And she quotes from some works that are basically saying, like, is it ethical that we've waited so long to start taking, like, proactive defensive action against these petrol companies? Violence can be the answer, but needs to be used strategically. I agree, Alexis. Society sure isn't going to think you're the good guy if you're fighting a turf. That's true. But society kind of already doesn't think that we're the good guys. This is what I mean. Like, the optics are already against us. Why are we living this way? Everybody's always pointing to someone else, saying, you're making us look like freaks. You're making us look bad. They hate us all anyway. Thank you, Alexis. I think physical violence could be effective with structured rules of engagement, like a duel. Bring back duels. See, I feel like that would be not an unfair way to go with this proposition that I have, you know. Nina Chi says, in a public sphere, it's not just the person's mind you're trying to change, but trying to make a point across. But when trying to make a point, a pacifist way is more effective. First of all, if someone is making fun of me or my partner for being disabled or being trans, and I slap the fuck out of their stupid face, like, that is not an attempt to change their mind. That's an attempt to change their behavior. I don't give a fuck if they change their mind. I want them to shut their mouth. Second of all, a pacifist way is more effective. Like, that's generally what I hear, like, what you hear, like, oh, the civil rights activists all say when they're, like, fighting for the rights of black people. The racism is not gone. People still think that they're inherently violent and inherently stupider. What the fuck are you, like 50 fucking 70 years? When did the civil rights movement start? It's been a lifetime now. How is that going so far? Yeah, peaceful protest is not as effective as people like to pretend. Indian independence, most overthrows of colonialism, civil rights, all had violent elements, and sometimes those violent elements are the reason the program succeeded. The problem is I would also like not to be murdered. Yeah. My thing is, like, I am more and more and more worried about getting murdered, so I am more and more and more thinking about being proactively violent. I think it's fair to say. Ela says you need both. You need people who are calm and rational to change the minds of those who aren't yet sure what they think yet, and you need violence to defend against those who have made their choice, and their choice is to see you dead. I'm personally a fan of turn the other cheek type pacifism, but to me that's a pretty deeply personal thing. Yeah, I find that people, like, mean different things when they say pacifism, so I find that I guess, like, one of my good friends is a pacifist, and he always says, like, I'm against, like, unjustified or unprovoked violence, I think, is more or less what he said. If you're a pacifist that believes in only that unprovoked violence is wrong, then at that point, it's just what your definition of violent is. Which, again, for me, like, I just don't believe anymore that speech is not violent. Even outside of the, like, directly calling for death of someone. Like, saying this person, like, we should go kill this person, you know? Like, I think even outside of that framework, there is an argument to be made that reacting with violence is just self-defense against the violence of the speech. Ren says, I agree with what you're saying, but the thing about racists believe black people are more violent is part of my conflicted feelings toward this. As a black person speaking for myself, responding to racism with violence further entrenches those beliefs, and helps justify response from the state. When people on the other side of the escalation are police with militarized weapons, violence versus non-violence feels like a lose-lose choice. Yeah, and listen, I understand the optics is very troublesome in that situation. I'm not, like, morally condemning those choices, per se. I'm just saying, like, I don't know that they're effective in the long term. Like, or they're only effective in the long term. Like, there's some, like, long game that's being played where it's like, in the end, history will show that we were always non-violent. And, like, well, how is that going so far? You know, like, how's the past, like, 70 years of that gone so far? The cops can just do a little fucking bus in some people from a neighboring city who are gonna break some stuff, and everybody's gonna blame the black people anyway. So, like, why would you not just start breaking shit at a certain point? They're gonna keep demonizing you forever. Yeah, Eli X is kind of understanding what I'm saying. If we're peaceful, we lose. If we're violent, we're feeding the stereotype, but we're more likely to get our point across. We are the villain no matter what, so we might as well do what works more. True. Well, howdy there, my dear sweet viewers, and my patrons especially. Y'all are the real MVPs, and I'm gonna be shouting out some real ones especially today. I'd like to thank Mersh Rolvag, Tiago Nascimento, Jovian F. Gaudreau, Jake Fortier, Bean, Amanda B., Heather Clarkson, Sarah A., R. Halverson, Wellington Marcus, Michelle Winter, Athiet, Suzanne Maynard, Nova, Frozen Summers, Mr. Atheist, and Elizabeth Bartell. Kisses.